On this edition of North Bay Bountiful, we explore the forest. Forests are some of the wildest places in the North Bay region and a living laboratory for science, wildlife, and soil health. In this episode, we travel up and down the west coast through the coast redwood forests and learn about the history and wisdom of controlled cultural burning from the North Fork Mono tribe. It's all coming up next on North Bay Bountiful.
North Bay Bountiful is made possible in part by Rocky, the free-range chicken, and Rosie, the original organic chicken. The Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District, Made Local Magazine, and Sonoma County Go Local. Support also provided by Pepperwood Preserve, and through the generous support of the Sonoma County Water Agency. Cultivate, celebrate, connect.
The forests of California are not only home to the world's largest trees, but they also support the richest diversity of life anywhere in the United States. In Marin County, Muir Woods National Monument is part of the larger Golden Gate National Recreation Area. This old-growth forest depends on regular and heavy fog for moisture during the dry season. However, weather patterns are changing and threaten not only the trees, but a wide variety of mammal and bird species. In order to better understand Muir Woods today, we need to explore the rich history of this irreplaceable forest environment.
The actual felling of a tree begins with the making of a scaffold for the axemen to stand on as they work. Then they begin their cutting their way into trees that may be as old as our civilization. For the redwood trees of California are probably the oldest of living things. The redwoods that grow along the coast live to be 2,000 years old. They are young at 350 years, they are mature at 1,000 years, and they reach old age at 1,500 years.
Redwood forests once grew throughout the northern hemisphere. As the Earth's climate changed, the redwood forests retreated. Two species survive in North America: coast redwoods and giant sequoias. Coast redwoods range from the Oregon border to California's Big Sur and inland as far as the fog drift.
So down they come, some of the world's oldest, biggest, and tallest trees. Trees that grow over 350 feet high. Trees that may be over 20 feet thick at the base. Trees that are so big that more than 20 houses can be made from just one tree. But don't think these giants are being completely destroyed. Many of the oldest and the biggest of the redwoods are being saved. Parks with thousands of acres of redwoods are set aside for our enjoyment.
Muir Woods National Monument, just north of San Francisco, is among the few remaining ancient coast redwood forests. Redwood groves provide habitat for a diverse array of plants and animals. 1 million people from around the world visit Muir Woods annually. But Muir Woods National Monument would not exist today were it not for the foresight of early conservationists. Theodore Roosevelt's tour of Yosemite National Park with naturalist John Muir in 1903 encouraged the president's conservationist sympathies. In 1906, Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act, empowering presidents to create national monuments by proclamation. Muir Woods was the 7th national monument established by Roosevelt. Businessman William Kent and his wife Elizabeth Thatcher Kent donated the old-growth forest land for Muir Woods. Roosevelt planned to name the site after Kent, but Kent insisted the monument be named instead to honor naturalist John Muir. The Kents bought these last uncut Marin County redwoods to protect them from destruction. Muir Woods was the first national monument created from land donated by private individuals. William Kent later became a congressman. In 1916, he introduced legislation to create the National Park Service. Elizabeth Kent remained politically active as a conservationist, as a participant in the women's suffrage movement, and as an advocate for world peace. In the last days of World War II, Muir Woods would play a part in the hopes for a lasting peace.
San Francisco, California, a momentous conference begins. Here, leaders of the United Nations, representing all but a fraction of the Earth's population, are laying the foundations of international security in the post-war world. United States Secretary of State Stettinius opens the first session and introduces President Truman, who speaks from Washington.
President Franklin Delano Roosevelt planned a session of the UN Conference for the Muir Woods National Monument at the suggestion of Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes. The Secretary had written the President, "Here, in such a temple of peace, delegates will gain perspective and a sense of time." President Roosevelt, chief architect of the UN Conference, died before the conference opened. On May 19, 1945, delegates representing 46 nations gathered in Muir Woods to honor President Roosevelt. No doubt, the delegates could feel wisdom in the trees. Redwood trees are resilient. Their longevity is not accidental. Tannic acid in redwood creates its distinctive color and makes the tree resistant to fire and the ravages of insects and fungi. But today, 96% of old-growth coast redwoods have been logged. John Muir once remarked, "Any fool can destroy trees. They cannot run away. God has cared for these trees, saved them from drought, disease, avalanches, and floods. But he cannot save them from fools."
When we look at stacks of redwood lumber, we may well be reminded of its ancient history. For this is lumber from a species of tree that has survived for millions of years. Trees that can withstand the insects and diseases that kill off other species. Trees that can withstand fire. Trees that tower over 350 feet. Trees that live to be 2,000 and 4,000 years old. The tallest, biggest, oldest trees in the world.
Muir Woods is an excellent example of an old-growth coast redwood forest. However, there are many types of forests throughout the western United States, each with different ecological needs and different wildlife and plant species. In the Sierra Nevada region, the North Fork Mono tribe has been using controlled cultural burning for over 15,000 years. The grass burning of these open-floor forests encourages the reemergence of food resources and mimics the natural fire cycle of the forest environment. Added benefits include invasive species control and higher water availability for trees. Modern science is learning from ancient ecological wisdom.
You have to know how to work with fire. When you're my age, I take my young ones out, smell the smoke, smell it. That's grass fire. Smell the smoke, that's a house burning. Smell the smoke, that's tires burning. That's a wood fireplace burning. You should be able to smell every single different kind of smoke. The animals teach their young to do that. But if there's no fire, they can't teach them to do that. That's why we have to burn. That's why we have to keep the fires going, so that all parts of life understand what it is that we're doing with fire. The North Fork Mono and most of the other Mono groups have been here for 15,000 years. When the Indian was out on the land, they always burned. So the use of fire comes through your land so that it can take care of your resources and give you new ones. We were burning an area that hadn't been burned for well over 100, 120 years. And when we did burn, these bushes that we're standing in the middle of that are basically 3 foot tall were about 5 or 6 feet tall, and so thick you could not walk through them. So dry that lichen and California dodder, which is a parasite, was beginning to crawl all over them and kill them. So it needed fire. This land needed fire. You need to be able to see through the trees. The concept that we are bringing forth when we work out on the land is this open concept. We've got to be able to see through. When the baby is inside of the basket, look through the basket. See the world. See through the basket to the outer world. See through the forest. See through from this world to the next world. Always the ability to see through.
Fire keeps the ground clean. Fire keeps our environment clean. Fire is to keep the plants healthy, that they keep growing more materials for us to use. It's a win-win situation for the plant and for us. Every plant is affected by fire. We as basket weavers, we are totally dependent upon the land for all of our materials because we can't go down to Michael's and buy all of our basket materials. And we need a full year, full cycle to gather our materials. This plant is struggling, but if it could get burned and burned back, it would have a whole bunch of new, just really straight shoots come out the top. But you can see how long of a piece that we need. One good thing, if we could have a fire, it brings the springs back. The water level comes up. So the springs hold more water.
When you open this up, snow, rain is able to get to the root system. And then the root system retains water. What we have done here by opening up this forest and this little ecosystem is we've returned the water.
Native communities in California in the past have used fire for a whole variety of purposes, including increasing the fruit production of plants, burning plants in order to encourage a certain sort of plant growth.
I think a really critical part of the way that it was done here in California is that when they did small burns, what would happen is you would get grasslands and berries and other plants that would come back. And typically, studies that have been done suggest that the diversity and the density of the foods that are from those plants really increases in that year or two after a burn.
This idea that you have a moderate level of disturbance that's when you have the highest levels of diversity and richness in an environment.
Today at the cultural burn site, the community fire crew was able to do a little bit of preparation for a burn in a few months, reducing the risk that when we light that burn, the fire will escape very quickly. So usually one of the top priority objectives of a prescribed burn would be to clear out the shrubs and trees that are representing fuel that a wildfire could come in and burn. Fire can course through the forest like electrons through a wire and energize those circuits that the forest has. It can turn on the meadows and encourage them to bloom at the right time of the year.
Fire is a spirit. This land has spirits. And when we're burning, they come alive. And those spirits, they still here. That's why we do sing to them. That's why we do talk to them. You have to understand fire. You have to respect fire. You can't be afraid of it. If you're afraid of fire, you won't understand fire.
The Spaniards wanted to suppress fire because they saw it as dangerous and did not necessarily understand what purposes people were putting the fire to. They saw it as a careless application of fire by what many of them referred to as, quote, primitive people, unquote. So fire suppression is very much tied up with social and political oppression of Native American people. It might sound like a good thing to have a lot of trees. That's what the Forest Service thought. And they wanted to maximize the number of trees per acre. But what they were doing was changing the landscape, getting lots of little thin trees in between the bigger trees and the wide spacings that had been maintained for thousands of years by indigenous fires. By suppressing fire and keeping people from lighting cultural burns, you built up the fuel over time. And that's what has led to a situation today where the forest is full of trees, but really closely packed and ready for that spark and for a huge wildfire to start at any time.
Fire is going to be on the land whether we like it or not. We can either choose when and where and how we prepare for it and how to deal with it, or continue on with fire suppression and hope really that it don't come back, but it eventually will. And the problem is it becomes these high-intensity super fires that cause nothing but damage. There's no benefit to it. I'm doing some shell sorting, the heavy fractions from flotation that we took in our tribal's traditional territory, finding even some fragments of fire-cracked rock, and getting a good number of all this for its relevance in our land tending uses in our territory. With cultural burns, you not only are removing those fuel loads that create those super fires, but you're healing the earth. When you wait for those big super fires or those wildfires, they destroy the soil, they bake the soil, it sterilizes it, kills a lot of the fire-dependent and non-fire-dependent seeds in the seed bank. It gets to a level of intensity where people can't stop it or suppress it anymore. Having prescribed burns, cultural burns, is something that we all realize, at least with experience on the land, that is something that needs to be done.
Even if you view this as a catastrophe or a disaster, it can also be viewed as an opportunity for the Forest Service to collaborate with tribes like Gold Springs Rancheria of Mono Indians to really talk together and collaborate and design those fires and those burn plans in such a way that you can meet the objectives that a tribe might have for caring for its cultural resources, while at the same time linking together many, many cultural burns to build a whole area of reduced fire risk because you are reducing the amount of fuel.
When you live in the mountains, when that's been your home, you know when your home is dirty. You know when your home needs to be cleaned. You know when things are not right. And so by not having fire on the land, not only Native Americans, ranchers, people who use the mountains, people who understand the forest, they'll all tell you the same thing. Our forest is trashy. You cannot leave it like that. You have to have fire in order to have rejuvenation.
Many people find solace and peace amongst the trees and wildlife of the forest. The Pacific Coast rainforests are more than environmental treasures, they are also special places to countless nature lovers. However, the silence can be broken by road building, development, and air traffic.
The Olympic Peninsula in western Washington is home to some of the last temperate rainforest in the world. It's often called the quietest place in the country.
It's better therapy for me than anything else I've really been through.
Charles Nelson has been struggling with anxiety and depression for years. He was diagnosed after he returned home from serving the U.S. Army in Kuwait and Somalia.
The hypervigilance would kick in. Driving in traffic was a problem, the reaction to noises.
To escape the noise, he takes weekly hikes deep into the rainforest with a group of veterans dealing with similar issues.
The biggest turning point for me was to get grounded, to get reconnected, to feel in an absolutely safe place.
Now, Nelson's quiet sanctuary may be disappearing. That's because the Olympic Peninsula may soon become a new military training ground for a very loud jet. Squadrons of Growler jets are based about 100 miles away at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island.
This is where everything starts.
Captain Scott Farr oversees the U.S. Navy's Growler fleet.
I am in charge of all the E-18G Growlers in the U.S. Navy's inventory.
His unit specializes in electronic warfare. They use the Growler to disrupt enemy radar and scramble threatening electronic signals, allowing U.S. troops to carry out missions undetected. Today, Farr is preparing to teach a new class of pilots how to identify and disrupt the right signals.
And it takes a lot of very complex training to develop that skill.
The problem is, Farr says his training options aren't complex enough. So the naval base proposed a new plan. It calls for putting mobile trucks on forest roads on the Olympic Peninsula. The trucks transmit electronic frequencies, and trainees practice homing in on the right signals. Then, the trucks move to a different part of the forest.
We have to have mobile emitters that can move around. Right now we have a single site based here on Whidbey Island. If you take a test and you know where the answer is all the time, it doesn't make for a very challenging test.
Trucks hiding on the forest floor will mean more growlers overhead. Whidbey pilots have been flying over the Olympic Peninsula since World War II. But base officials say more residents began taking notice after the Growler was introduced in 2008.
Whidbey Island Naval Air Station welcomed its first EA-18G Growler fighter jet Tuesday. The Growler replaces the Prowler, and there is quite a difference between the two planes.
Nelson noticed a difference too.
Here we are out seeking healing in this beautiful place, and it was interrupted by the absolute epitome of what I've been trying to avoid.
The electronic warfare range is one of many military training activities under consideration for remote parts of western Washington. The Navy recently renewed permits for sonar and explosives testing in the waters off the Pacific Northwest coast. Another plan will allow Navy SEALs to train on public beaches. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army proposed helicopter training in wilderness areas in the North Cascades. The military's presence in the Northwest has been growing as bases shut down elsewhere.
additional forces were redeployed to the state of Washington. And they were moved to the state of Washington because of our geographic strategic significance.
The Department of Defense has been shifting resources to the West Coast, in part to protect trade routes with Pacific Rim countries like China and South Korea.
We are hours closer by air and days closer by sea for getting to places throughout the Pacific.
Washington State also has ideal training ground. That's becoming more rare.
Training ranges themselves are endangered throughout our country just because of population encroachment.
As the Northwest's military and civilian populations grow, they'll be more likely to cross paths in the region's quiet places.
You know, I'm not anti-military, I'm not anti-Navy at all. My whole point is convince me that it has to be done here.
If the U.S. Forest Service approves the plan, growlers will fly here 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. Base officials say that's only a 10% increase. Nelson says any increase is too much. He knows firsthand how difficult it is to restore peace and quiet once it's lost.
Each forest along the West Coast is unique with a special set of circumstances that either protect or threaten these valuable ecological assets. We all have a role to play in helping our forests remain healthy or regain their health in the face of adversity.